However, I'll take the introduction here. So hi, everyone. My name is Kyla, and I'm a part of the Mining Shared Value team. And our work focuses on helping to lead this wonderful community of practice with the World Bank called the ELLED Community of Practice, or Extractive-led Local Economic Diversification. So today we're diving into a webinar, which of course, as all of the ELLED COP webinars, is able to go into a higher level of depth because all of our practitioners or all of our members are direct practitioners within local content. So we're excited today to dive in deep on what local content can look like, particularly in this case at a cities and regions level. So we see a lot of the time national governments taking on the task of to increase or to support local content efforts. We think that there's a wonderful opportunity here to discuss more deeply what that looks like at the municipal and regional government level, as they're often responsible for crucial elements of the success of these efforts. So we're excited to welcome today Lisanne and Andres, who will first speak about the OECD cities and regions work as a whole and some reflections on that front. Of their experience. And then we've also got Jason and Haley from Northern Australian Territory to speak to their experience about implementing these policies and ideas on the ground. Some key lessons we can all take away as local content practitioners there. So I think we dive right in. So Andres, if you don't mind sharing your screen and we can start the first presentation.
Sure. Okay. Hello, everyone. Everyone is. It looks good. Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you, Jeff, and all the team of Mining Value Chair and the World Bank. This initiative, I think, is very timely and aligns very well with our work. So we're going to present directly our ideas on local content. This presentation will be divided into main blocks. First, myself, I am going to introduce the findings that the OECD have gathered through the main case studies on mining. Some of the a high-level takeaways that we have found, and then my colleague Lisanne, she's gonna get into the details on the OECD Mining Regions Initiative, and we'll share with you some examples and cases from the work we have done with some municipalities and regions across OECD countries. So if it's okay, I start directly with the first part. Is more or less the incentive for the city to work at the local level with mining is not coming from the mining sector itself. It rather comes from looking at rural economies, what makes a rural economy works, and what is the composition of rural and regional economies in OECD countries. We are Lisanne and me. We belong to the rural unit, that is a team that works for the Working Party on Rural Policies inside the OECD. We subscribe to the rural development conferences and all the work around regional development. Our team mainly works on rural issues. We have developed rural policy reviews in 12 countries. We have a series of thematic studies. We work on services delivering in rural regions, linking renewable energy for rural development, rural-urban partnerships. We have done some work on a scope on indigenous people in rural development, rural innovation, and this stream of work that is mining regions and cities from the scope of regional development. So that is the main incentive for us to work on mining. And we have, since we started this work, and probably Lisan is going to explain you more about this, in 2016, we have conducted a number of case studies, and we have identified a series of facts about mining at the local level. So probably, I think you all know that mining brings a number of benefits at the regional and local level. High income, that brings a important increase of salaries when you compare with the average type of activities in rural regions. Innovation when we work together with governments, and also investment in services in the host community. However, it brings also some challenges for municipalities and local governments, especially high volatility, income inequality at the local level, negative externalities in terms of environment and land use, and sometimes challenges in terms of social acceptance and migrants and flight workers. Some of the was focusing on the main probably drawbacks that policy need to address to make this sector a good contributor for regional development. I'm going to mention two of them. First is the high volatility at the local level. We observe that normally mining regions that for us we have realized that most of them are remote. We classify them as rural, according with the OECD classification. These regions tend to be low diversified in terms of economic activities, tend to be with a low access in terms of markets with other products and with other big cities in the country, of course, depend of the country. And that comes also to volatility when external shocks occur, crisis or external shocks in terms of economic impacts. We observe that regions, they experience higher volatility in their GDP than the average of regions in the country. We observe also that there is a high productivity in these regions, but with an uneven distribution of benefits. Mining, as you know, I imagine, is a capital intensive sector that in a way employs a low share of population at the local level, directly, of course, but indirectly it brings a number of employments. The issue is where to allocate the high value and the high level of wages in these activities, and how to make that all the activities surrounding mining at the local level benefit from the main business. I've seen also a number of well-being outcomes that differentiate mining regions to other regions. Here we compare 40 mining regions in OECD countries against the total of almost 400 OECD regions. We are here talking about TL2 regions, that is a European classification that we can say is in United States is states, or in France is département. More or less, this is the level of region that we are talking about. Here we see that mining regions, they outperform other OECD regions in income, life satisfaction. They have also good outcomes on housing and education. It's interesting that this finding on environment, because sometimes we measure this in terms of CO2, and there are other regions other industries that surprisingly can be more polluted in terms of emissions than our region, our regions that in this case. However, mining regions, they underperform in a number of important outcomes, especially health, access to services, civic engagement, and social networks. So that's why we started this initiative focusing on this differentiation between mining regions and other regions. We can then, if you want, discuss the underlying factors behind these trends that we can share some thoughts during the discussion. So what are the key issues that we have identified? We have identified mainly 6 issues of mining at the local level. This is a global business that have special impacts in communities. So localized environmental externalities, especially water conflicts and noise and land use. Conflicts with other land users. Here we have done some studies on conflicts with the tourism and indigenous people. Innovation and value change, that for local communities, especially those that are not prepared to receive these kind of investments, they need to adapt the production techniques and adapt the local businesses to fit into this type of innovative, let's say, value chain. Local workforce also, we have seen skill mismatches at the local level. These fly-in, fly-out workers create a kind of competition with the local labor, so that is a factor to take into account. Regional infrastructure, the mining also pushes municipalities to improve and enhance their roads and the quality of infrastructure, ports and airports. And one of the most important, probably right now, at least when we are talking in the energy transition, this scope of mining closure and transition is how policies that aim to promote environmental transition can address what to do with local communities, what to do with when the mine is closing, what to do with the workers, with infrastructure. So I think Lisan is gonna talk a bit more about a case study with developing in Finland that is linked with mining closure. A part of the specific impacts for being a region specialized in extractive industries, mining regions, as I said, are also rural regions in a broader terms. And these regions, they face a commonality of impacts from megatrends. So this table we developed together with a region, 2 regions, Västerbotten and Norrbotten in Sweden, for a case study, and we took inputs from other regions of the OECD initiative. We identified 3 megatrends for mining regions that are also related with other rural regions: demographic changes, climate change and environmental pressures, and technological innovation. For each of them, we have opportunities and challenges. Probably I'm going to read quickly some opportunities for some of them. For demographic changes, we have seen that some governments have focused on lifelong learning activities to fit again elderly population in the workforce. That is interesting. We have some challenges that mainly come from the population and demographic decline. We have seen a lot of out-migration of young people, especially women, from OECD rural regions. And that also comes with a high pressure to local finances, or to collect taxes to stay in alive the services of education and health. In climate change, opportunities for mining regions come from the competitive advantage to becoming a high standard region in environmental terms that bring also new jobs. when we talk about new environmental technologies, and increase the need for some minerals and metals that before were not so in the loop. We talk of these important metals that are linked with the environmental technologies. In technological innovation, we have opportunities also to compensate for the shortage of labor, enhance attractiveness now with the digitalization of services, and raise productivity, of course, when we talk specifically on mining operations. All of these, I mean, for example, in technological innovation, we have seen also these challenges on automation of jobs and competitiveness in terms of innovation. Here the question is how local governments can plan ahead and can put the right policies to seize the benefits of these changes and fit all the benefits from mining with other local activities. When we talk about local content now specifically, the OECD have done some papers and reports on the topic. We see local content more with a broader view rather than local content itself from a provision from mining companies to the local community. We see that as a broader necessity to link with municipal plans and regional strategies. 5 main objectives of the local content strategies are upstreaming supply chain at the domestic level, workforce development, transfer of technology, research development, and the last one, how we enhance the added value of downstream activities, the transformation of metals into products. As a whole, the message here from us is that there are different types of local content practices, mandatory, other that are more in terms of incentive, quantitative in terms of number of employees that the mining company has to hire, or qualitative, that is more in terms of innovation. Our message is that mandatory and quantitative local content practices are not the most effective to align with the local strategies. We advocate more for a broader view of flexible incentive from governments to private companies in terms of quantitative practices. I think with that, I will give the word to my colleague Lisa to explain the rest.
Hi everyone. Thanks very much for this invitation and the opportunity sort of to introduce also the work that we're doing to you guys, which is really nice. So just as to link up with what Andres said and the data we've just shown you, we know that regions that are specialized in extractive industries such as mining really face specific challenges and opportunities, and sort of as the OECD has links around the world and is working with multiple countries around the world, the objective of this project is sort of to bring these regions together so they can learn from each other and sort of exchange on the knowledge they've gathered. And so within the broader project of OECD mining regions and cities, we seek to develop a global toolbox with recommendations and evidence to benchmark and inform regional development within sort of the mining and extractive context. And it's really about building a common pool of knowledge for different stakeholders to use. So this would be the regional development agencies, but as well the private sector, as well as sort of like academia as well. So this is really sort of trying to build the evidence on what works and what doesn't work within mining regions. And then part of this work is not only building this toolbox, but it's also building knowledge that is very specific to particular regions. So we work with regions and do case studies with them, to consult them and develop recommendations on how to support them best in implementing regional development policies in the mining and extractive context. And we've already conducted 2 of those case studies, and I'll be talking a bit about that later. So we've been working with the regions in Finland and Sweden, and we'll also conduct some work in Western Australia as well as in Spain. And then another part, sort of aside from the content, is building a platform of these regions and cities to collaborate amongst each other, to share knowledge, to get into dialogue between what's happening and what is working and what doesn't work, because oftentimes regions can actually learn more from each other when they're not from their own country, because they are so special, because they have this specialization in extractive industries. So next slide, please. One back, yeah. So just to give you a bit of an overview of where we've been coming from, the project was started in 2017 with an event in Antofagasta. So we tried to sort of run 2 parallel streams. One is the studies and the content creation, and the other one is the events. So we've started with an event in Antofagasta in Chile. We've also held 2 other events already, one in Darwin and the Northern Territory of Australia, and then last year we had one in Skellefteå in Sweden, and there will be more events coming up, so we'll be glad to meet you there at our events, hopefully next year in Karratha in Western Australia, and then afterwards in Canada. And so, as I already mentioned, on sort of the content side, on the study side, we've been working with Finland and Sweden on case studies that are completed, and we're embarking on new case studies, and at the end of this process we'll probably have this toolkit that summarizes everything we've been doing to provide policymakers with better guidance in this context. And I'll be moving towards the examples. Next slide, please, Andres. So I first just want to give you a bit of an example from where we started with. So we started actually with a review that we did in Antofagasta in Chile back in 2013, which was really a while back. And when we were doing the review, we've been noticing that the city there, is a mining city, has problems with livability and attractiveness, especially to build sort of their local workforce and get people to stay there, not only to come for work, but build a life there. So, there's sort of like, when we did the study, this also came about that we saw that the urban benefits is not equally distributed. They have problems with housing, space, and also giving sort of, just feeling neighborhoods with life. There's sort of weak environmental management of water and waste, and they had a bit of an uncoordinated approach to regional development. There was a lot coming from the national government from the top, but the regional needs were not as much identified. So what came out of this process was that there was the creation of a public and private partnership that promotes dialogue amongst different actors and that facilitated actions to be taken. And that sort of happened, as you can see in the time series there. So there was like a participatory process set up between the academia, the municipality, the regional government, and academia, as well as the private sector. And they were setting up an integrated vision and a portfolio of where the city can move to. And then they've identified initiatives for implementation. So they've come up with 40 projects to increase the livability of the city. And 11 of them are finished, and 29 are currently underway and will be completed until 2025. And so the key sort of learnings out of this process in Antofagasta was that these participatory processes must be really consistent and inclusive, balance and expectation, because you can never make everybody happy. Then is really, this cooperation is about complementing and not replacing each other. So each stakeholder of the 4 stakeholders comes in with a specific strengths and a weakness. So it's really important to balance on this and make this work. And then often the public sector is essential to provide for sustainability of the project. So they make sure that this is a long-term aim, and it's followed through and everybody is included. So that's really important on this example. So next slide. So then I want to jump into another example that we did a case study in Finland and North Karelia, which is a super interesting case when you look at managing sort of the transition of a mining town. And so this one is a small town in the northeast of Finland, so quite high up. They've had a long tradition in copper mining and saw the height of their mining sort of career in the 1960s, but then they were forced to close the mine towards the end of the 80s because there was just not enough copper anymore. And the story is really interesting because they were able to transition from to a manufacturing-based economy, so that works with the export of metal technology and mining services today. And it's known now for sort of an industrial park that has knowledge intensive services and is globally connected throughout the companies, even though it's quite a small town. And what's interesting here, or what sort of is the learning from this transition process, is the diversification started super early. So even in the height of the mining in the 60s, they were already thinking about diversification, and it was initially the initiative of the company who said to the municipality, well, look, it's not going to, this is going to be exhausted at some point, the mine. We want to think ahead and make sure that we can still provide a good living for the people here, and this is not going to die out and become an extinct town. So they made really smart use of the local know-how to be able to build this mining cluster. And the government in that instance was super important to provide incentives for firms to move to the town, or to bring about this industrial park through loans, through technical assistance that helped sort of smaller firms to move there. And obviously also the coordination is really important in order to create a dynamic enough labor market and business environment for this to be able to sustain. And if you want to know more, this case study is also available online on the OECD library, so you can read more if you want on this case, because this is really just a brief sort of introduction. And then I just want to jump into the next example quite quickly, which is sort of fostering, which I named it Fostering Innovation in Northern Sweden. So we did. Hello, Vicky. There's somebody on the phone. Hello. Well, just to come back to the northern Sweden, so we did a case in Västerbotten, Norrbotten. 90% of the EU iron ore is actually sourced in this region. And we identified, when we went there, we identified that there's a significant opportunity for this region to become a global leader in environmentally friendly mining through the technology and innovation they have going on. So on the right, you already see an image of a truck that's actually driving autonomously through sort of the northern landscape there. And the real strength of this region is that it has broadband, clean energy from water, very high skilled labor force, and very good linkages sort of between large mining firms and universities. So they're heavily driving sort of innovation processes there, and have made advancements in reducing emissions throughout the production chains and the transport and so forth. So they're doing quite exciting things, but also at the same time, this region is facing aging, it's facing sort of a decline in population because it's quite a rural place. People are moving out and it's sparsely populated, and often the smaller firms are locked in to sort of supplier relationships with these larger firms, and there's limited to infrastructure capacity. So what's really important in this case is that the smaller firms and the municipalities are also taking part in this innovation process. And that was one of the key things that we identified, was that there is really a big need to enhance this innovation ecosystem and to also include the smaller players within what's happening, and within the implementation of what they call the smart specialization strategy that they've identified in the region. And the government there then plays the role of helping to identify the knowledge-based strengths in the region, and within the sort of the entrepreneurs, and support sort of also the investments that are made. So that's because we're going over time. I think I'm just going to cut it short here and then just going to the last slide. So if you, just to give you an overview again, so the framework that we work with is structured according to 3 dimensions that we think are important for regions to benefit from the mining going on within their territory. So one of them is the competitiveness and diversification. The other one is quality of life, and the next one is then sort of the fiscal relations, regional governments, and the way investments are made. And we've identified, like when we go into sort of making recommendations, we think about each of these 3 dimensions, the policy objectives, and then the possible actions to be taken by local government, but also by the national governments. And yeah, looking forward to the discussion, and I'm closing it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Lisanne and Andres. Just a reminder to all of those listening to please mute your microphones. We do have some background noise going on. And also a reminder that in your chat function on WebEx here, feel free to please write out questions as you have them. We'll be having quite a substantial amount of time left at the end to take questions and have discussion among members with the speakers here today. So as we go, please write out your questions and we'll be moderating a discussion at the end. Okay, so up next we have Jason and Haley from the Northern Territory of Australia. Jason, if you're able to share your screen now.
Sharing it now. You can see that fine, Kayla?
Yes, all good to go.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute this evening. It's this evening in Darwin at the moment. I'm Jason Howe, Executive Director with Investment Territory, Department of Trade, Business Innovation for Australia's Northern Territory Government, and I'd like to introduce my superior here, Haley Richards, Senior Executive Director for Investment Territory. So I'll be taking the lead with the presentation, but Haley will help fill in the gaps and will bring a great wealth of knowledge to the discussions following. So just in case, if you weren't aware of where the Northern Territory is, of course, this is Australia, just to the south of Southeast Asia. A great market here that we have fantastic access to. It's certainly a competitive advantage regarding our position. The Northern Territory here is highlighted in orange, and we're sitting in Darwin, just to the north. So in terms of today's agenda, I'd just like to provide you a quick introduction and tour of the Northern Territory. If I don't achieve anything else but provide some interest in getting you here to the Territory and enjoying the fruits of our jurisdiction, then I'd love to, if I achieve that, that's a great outcome. Also, I'd like to provide an overview of the NT gas industry, which is the basis of our case study, and it's a case study that's in motion. Certainly not one that we're reflecting on greatly, but we are enjoying some successes at the moment that we'd like to share. Dive into our NT gas strategy and the 5-point plan, which is about maximising the value of the gas industry to the Territory, and then more specifically about the gas service and supply plan, which is targeting more specifically about increasing local content of existing and future activities. I'm assuming everyone's hearing us all right. I think if you're not speaking, if you can put on mute, there is some background noise, but I'll continue on. So the Territory is about, it's a huge land. It's 1.4 million kilometres, and we only have about 250,000 people. So we essentially have 5 to 6 kilometres per capita. And Darwin, where we're sitting at the moment, sits within a tropical climate, but our next major urban centre in Alice Springs, which is just 1,600 kilometres down the track here, sits within an arid climate. So we cover a vast area, sparse population, and of course comes with that is relatively limited infrastructure, but we do have infrastructure that is strategically located. Another important point about the Territory is that we do have a significant population of overseas born community members, And we're also have 30% of our population identifies as Aboriginal Territorian. And unfortunately, our Aboriginal Territorians do suffer from statistics that demonstrate that they have fallen behind the general population with respect to some of the social well-being, social demographic, economics and well-being statistics. And it's a great focus of ours to constantly try and close that gap. And certainly some of the opportunities that we see coming in the gas industry development certainly provides potentially generational opportunities to enact change in some of our most remote regions. A beautiful photo of our city. So this is the tour of the MT. So this is Darwin. We've got 130,000 people in the greater Darwin area. This is a wonderful natural deep water port here, and just off to the left here, we've actually got 3 LNG trains producing. We've got pristine coastlines. Water for Territorians, particularly in the north, is part of our lifestyle. We love our fishing. This is a couple of Indigenous Territorians undertaking some traditional hunting methods. We have wet seasons in the north. We're very dry in the south. In the middle, we have these beautiful tablelands with national parks that are just fantastic for exploring. Communities spread out through the whole vast landscape. And as we head down our 1,600 kilometre main highway, which this is what it looks like for a fair portion of it, you get towards the red centre, and this is some Indigenous Territorians searching for some bush tucker, some grubs of some sort. And this lands you into Alice Springs, which is our major town centre of about 25,000 people in the centre. And so we have some unique demographics, but when we look at our economic position, we are a small economy. So we've got 250,000 people. We're an economy of about 26 billion Australian, about 20 billion US. But we do, while we're only 1% of the population, we do punch our weight in terms of our output. We produce about 1.4% of Australia's output. So we have a high GSP per capita. And this is predominantly led by our recent growth, or relatively recent growth in the last 10, 20 years on the back of exports. So when we actually dive down into the final state demand, you start to understand, particularly when you're looking at the private investment story since 2011 to now, you can see, and this investment's peak here over this period from 13 to 18 is predominantly on the back of one project, being the INPEX Ichthys project, which has produced 2 LNG trains. It supplies about 10% of Japan's gas consumption demand on an annualized basis. And this was one project coming on, about 40 billion, the largest Japanese investment outside of Japan at that point in time. And then you can see the curtailing of the investment. We are now sitting in this point in time. So while our GSP figure has only just in the last year dropped down into a negative position, we've been running in essentially a demand recession for a number of years. And so we're trying to move away from this boom and bust economy that we have, diversify and broaden the economic base. And so hopefully we don't have to deal with these peaks and troughs at this point in time. But some of that will likely come with our critical mass as we develop over time. In terms of this graph is a pie chart, it's just trying to signify how important mining and manufacturing is to our economy. And it's probably interesting to note that our economy is heavily dependent on services and government employees. There's about 30,000 employees, direct employees for the government up here, and indirectly through the non-government organisations, it would be significantly greater. So we've got a unique context whereby we sit as a jurisdiction within a first world country with a very well-developed economy. However, our jurisdiction is very much in a developing scenario. Most of our projects that are transformational, all our transformational projects are greenfields, and often require legislation changes to support them getting up. So we've got some unique challenges. And certainly I'd like to highlight that while Australia is unique in itself, if you do come to Australia, you have to come to the NT because the NT is unique in its own right compared to the rest of Australia. And I say that as a resident here of 6 years. It's a different experience. So please make sure you come up this way. And so dropping into the case study, we're really looking at gas. And as we've highlighted so far, the gas industry plays a significant role. And at this point in time, we have a well-established gas industry. We are the third largest producing region in Australia, and we're currently the largest producer or exporter of LNG in the world at the moment. We surpassed Qatar earlier this year. We expect Qatar to surpass us in the not too distant future as additional facilities come online, but that does signify the significance of our production. And we now know that through the establishment or the critical mass that is built over the last 20 years with projects coming online, initially ConocoPhillips operated facility with 1 train. Ithacus LNG came on board in 2018 with 2 additional trains. Our domestic supply, predominantly used for power generation, came online in 2009. So with this critical mass of now producing about 12 megatonne per annum, we have a services supply industry that's largely organically developed. And a study that we've undertaken recently with our LNG operators, looking into the services that are required to keep their operations going, identified that there was about $400 million in services per annum required, and Territorian businesses are enjoying about 100 million of that. So about 25%, which in a technical offshore industry makes some sense, but certainly that study, which I'll drop into a bit more detail, has identified opportunities for us to work with the operators and proponents to increase local content for Territorians. And so while this industry has been developing for about 20 years now, in terms of its critical mass here, a couple of years ago, we released the latest iteration of our gas strategy, which clearly articulates a vision that by 2030, we want to be a world-class hub for gas production, manufacturing, and services. And so, as you can see there's 5 points that support this: expanding the LNG export hub, growing the service and supply industry, establishing a gas-based processing and manufacturing hub, growing the local research, innovation and training capacity, and contributing to Australia's energy security, which is important in our context because the projected shortage of gas that's expected on our eastern coast come the mid-20s is expected to be a driving force behind the development of some of our more remote fields. Now, it's interesting on the back of Andre's and Lizanne's presentation, and thank you very much for that presentation, is that out of the toolbox, I was talking to Hayley as you were presenting it, and it looks like we almost took your toolbox and replicated a number of our 5-point plans, action items here. What's important though with this vision is that it has articulated very clearly to all stakeholders. So this was released in 2018 at our premier industry event up here. And in 2019, when I had only just stepped into this role, it was very interesting to see and encouraging to see that industry had adopted this language and had adopted this vision, and they knew very clearly what we wanted as a jurisdiction and a community to get in terms of a transaction for our resources, ensuring that we have jobs, that we have opportunities. So it was great and encouraging to see that this narrative had been adopted by industry, by our community, and this has greatly assisted with mobilising the buy-in and the support required to grow our service and supply over the next couple of years. This also clearly articulates a vision of how we're actually going to increase value for Territorians. So as I mentioned maybe I didn't mention, one of our key roles as an agency and as a division is to attract, promote and facilitate private sector investment that creates jobs. So by driving further development that creates further LNG trains, which is a driving force in this industry at this point in time, targeting the export market, the netback LNG rate, developing further fields with LNG export in mind is a means to a way to continue developing our industry, which is going to continue providing greater benefits to Territorians. When we step to point 2, of course, we want to raise our local content from the 25% it's currently at to 50%, which I'll drop into the target shortly, by 2025. And that's got the ability to add easily $1 billion to our economy over the next 5 to 10 years, and that's without any of the potential growth that we believe is coming down the pipeline. And number 3, and I'll stop there on this slide, is establishing gas-based processing and manufacturing. And the intent here is that we want to move away from the traditional Australian model of identifying resources, extracting them, and sending them overseas in the raw form to buy them back in a value-added form, such as a mobile phone or some technological device. We want to move up that value chain. And so we're targeting producers, trying to land producers to come here for methanol, ammonia, urea, for some of those industries that make sense to the markets that are to our north, but also some of the markets that they may well be able to displace with some of those products within Australia. Namely, ammonia and urea are key fertilisers for our agricultural industry. Now, with this slide, this is to capture some of our potential prospects. So at the moment, one of our greatest development prospects is an onshore basin called the Beetaloo Sub-Basin. Now, this has been identified to have up to 500 TCF in place, and at a recoverable rate of about 10%, this could be enough resource to power Australia for the next 200 years. So this is a potentially transformational project for the territory, but particularly for this region. And you can see here, this field exists about 500 kilometres south of Darwin, extends for about 300 kilometres, and these towns around this area have only up to 5,000 odd people here, with communities dispersed through this area. So as the exploration and appraisal continues, and we're expecting further results later this year to hopefully firm up the prospectivity of this resource, we are thinking very carefully at this point in time, if those results come back positive, our appraisal will continue for the next 3 to 5 years, then go into construction and production, is how do we position ourselves as a community to maximise those benefits? And touching on demographics in the territory is really ensuring that we're maximising the benefits out of any development that occurs here for Aboriginal Territorians. So we're ensuring that those in country, in community, are enjoying the benefits, and it's not being siphoned away to the fly in, fly out, or other aspects of the community, as touched on by Lizanne in some of the case studies previously. So earlier this year, we released our gas service and supply plan, and this is where we've articulated very clearly our ambitions to grow from what has been documented so far, 25% local content to Territorians. We want to increase that to 50% by 2025. So we've articulated a very clear vision. We have had acceptance, and this vision was created in collaboration with both industry and consultation with industry and community. And so now we're mobilising behind this. And it's not just simply a pipe dream, it's a reality that could easily come to fruition on the back of the projects that are being facilitated at this point in time. And of course, we've got the current state of the service to the LNG players offshore. And of course, if the onshore side of things comes online, it's a lot less technical, there's a lot greater opportunity. So again, our ambitions here to add $1 billion to the economy over the next 10 years, I'm cautiously optimistic that that is quite a conservative figure. And I mentioned that there was significant collaboration, and of course, with industry, with respect to the figures in terms of the 25% of procurement spend, that to get to that point in time where the operators were willing to share that data, that confidential data, that was a process that took 12 to 18 months. Now, we invested heavily in that process to get behind the veil, to understand where their spend is going, and the operators were willing to share down to scope level, procurement spend level. So now we have very rich data that, that through a workshop that's due to go ahead next month with the operators will enable us to start identifying what are those scopes of work, or what are the potential scopes of work that Territorian businesses may well be able to service today through aggregation of the services that are required across the three operators, or otherwise that we could build the capability either through training and the likes in partnership with these operators, or perhaps through joint ventures of businesses with the right skill sets coming in and joint venturing with local businesses to provide the local content to ensure that they can take on these additional pieces of work. So while there's this great strategy and it's quite intangible, we're now getting down to quite a tactical level that is evidence-based and has developed over time with the buy-in of the operators, consulting with communities. So we're trying to take everyone on this journey. And while we do have, and I'm interested to discuss this after this presentation, about that compulsory local development plans haven't been found to be the most efficient and effective, we do have some of those compulsory content plans in place at the moment, but ideally we're wanting to move to a sustainable position where it makes great business sense for our operators to go local, and so therefore it's a sustainable outcome without the need for us to constantly push this agenda. So in the service and supply plan, there are three key pillars of action. We want to strengthen the commitment of gas operators and contractors to local content. We want to grow the local workforce and business capability, and we want to strategically develop the service and supply ecosystem. I'd just like to highlight Max here, Max Nicholson. He's a general manager at Nelly Hydraulics. He's a great case study for us and a real proactive business operator and owner in the Territory who recognised that by changing the way he did business, he was able to start competing and has subsequently won and now predominantly services the gas industry. But Max is a great example where it was a mindset from within that enabled him to seek the support that was available to transform his business and position themselves in a conscious way to compete for work and service this industry, which has its challenges. Businesses often coming from light industry and moving into heavy industry don't realise sometimes some of the qualifications that are required or the certifications that are required to even be competitive start. And some of these businesses don't understand the cash conversion cycles, and so therefore the financial resources that they require. But counter to that, we're also working with our operators and proponents and asking them to try and package up scopes of work and reduce their threshold of requirements when it makes sense to do so to provide entry points for local businesses as we build this capability. So dropping down into the pillars of action, strengthen the commitment of gas operators and contractors to local commitment is quite an obvious one, but there is a lot of nuances to this in terms of previously there have been plans, territory benefit plans, which are essentially our local content plans, which have not necessarily been compulsory. Reporting against them hasn't been required as a compulsory activity, and sometimes the follow-up on our part hasn't necessarily been overly effective. We continue to explore the benefit of territory benefits policies, and we find that as we engage with proponents and they come on the journey with us, that while it might be an annoyance to them to some extent in the first instance, is that it becomes a competitive advantage for them over time as they work out how to maximise the opportunities that are presented by obtaining services and supply locally in terms of security of supply, access to that supply, and ultimately reduce costs from reducing the logistics requirement for that support. In here, I'd like to highlight that we're also looking at other policy levers. So, for example, I'm sure that many of you have commissions underway or focus groups underway to consider how do you position your jurisdictions for the new normal that will evolve as this current health economic crisis starts to subside in whatever way that looks like when we get to that point in time, is how do you position your jurisdiction to take advantage of the opportunities and overcome the challenges that are to come. With that, we are starting to consider, well, do we need to strengthen our major projects facilitation framework? And that may involve legislating a major project coordinator, for example, that would then enter into a formal negotiation and formalise some of the local content that we're expecting. I'll tend to some of those questions towards the end, if you like. On to the next pillar. Sorry, something is correcting this. So growing the local workforce and business capability. Obviously, this is a key aspect of any service and supply plan, is ensuring that the services and the capabilities that are required from operators are available locally, or we're identifying pathways to create that locally. We are very hands-on in our jurisdiction, and there's significant levels of support available in the territory for businesses, but we need to ensure that that support that's available is actually fit for purpose with respect to ensuring that our businesses are building their capabilities specifically for this industry. And in the interest of time, I'll just scoot over a little bit further and happy to take any questions or discussion period. And the final pillar of action is strategically develop the service and supply ecosystem. So this is about recognising those opportunities within our existing ecosystem, and perhaps in another way, we've got a live example underway at the moment where we are facilitating the construction of a shiplift facility that could service the offshore vessels that are typically required, platform support vessels, anchor handling vessels that are required to support the offshore industry. At this moment in time, we don't have the infrastructure that enables us to pull those vessels out of the water and service them on a periodic basis. They have to traverse across to Perth in Western Australia or Singapore, which is at least 5 days sailing time each way. So with this $400 to $600 million asset, once it's built, we'll then be able to access that opportunity that exists at this moment in time, but we're physically unable to access it through some of the constraints in our resources or enabling infrastructure. So identifying those opportunities as government and working with our stakeholders and proponents to fill those gaps enables us to start maximising the opportunities that are already there without any further growth prospects. So in summary, some of the key lessons that I would hope to share through our case study, explicitly and implicitly, is that number one, it's really important to understand the industry and the potential development scenarios in order to attract, facilitate and preempt development, which then enables you to proactively develop strategies and initiatives to drive creation. So, for example, with our industry at the moment, there's potential growth prospects offshore, there's potential growth prospects onshore. And we have those scenarios mapped out at this point in time, and we understand that depending on the firming of the prospectivity of those resources, what steps we're going to start taking in order to position ourselves to maximise the value and the benefits that will come with those developments. Additionally, that's ensuring that we're talking to operators who operate on long lead times for these projects very early in the development of the concept to ensure that we're advocating for the services that are available here and working with the proponents to ensure that we're implementing strategies to fill some of those gaps so that they're bought into that process. I'd also highlight that the goal is to sustainably increase local content and work towards this achieving through, and I would really strongly suggest working towards achieving this through a collaborative partnership model with industry, business, government, community, all stakeholders. This is incredibly important when it comes to social license and ensuring that we're addressing those social values that give our community members comfort of these operations in their backyard. It's important for us to onboard operators and get them to a point where they recognise and they realise the value of supporting local supply chains, because it provides economic benefit in the medium to long term. It's also important from a resourcing perspective, in that we have limited resources as a facilitator in terms of the Northern Territory Government. We want to bring partners along so that they drive those initiatives forward beyond the initial kickoff, and so that we can redirect our attention elsewhere to continue adding value. Consider the cumulative benefit and impact of all policies and initiatives and how this could play out strategically over time. We're very acutely aware in the Northern Territory of some of the challenges that we have to overcome in terms of making projects viable. So we need to carefully consider the cumulative impact and benefit of all those initiatives, so that we're not making projects unfeasible, particularly as greenfield projects, and that we're ensuring that we're actually creating value through the extraction of opportunities and creation of opportunities, rather than necessarily taking greater value today for a worse outcome tomorrow. And finally, be open, transparent, and even aspirational with your vision. Use it to advocate and mobilise support, facilitate buy-in, and create a collective mandate to maximise local content. And I really saw the power in this in terms of our gas strategy being communicated the year prior to me starting this role. Industry really on being onboarded and adopting that narrative. And now we're getting community that's holding industry to account, and industry coming to the table saying, hey, we want to work together on this local content opportunity. So it really drives greater opportunities adopting this approach, or at least it has in my experience. So thank you. I believe I've gone over time, so hopefully that incites some discussion.
Thank you so much, Jason. Just can everybody hear me? Make sure we're, I'll take it as a yes. We're just going to put up our slide here showing the Q&A. Thanks so much, Jason, and as, obviously as you as well, Andreas and Lizanne. Jason, I think your presentation really kind of gets into the mechanics of how you make this kind of local content program work, which, like I alluded to before, is that you don't really get that from high-level national government regulations. You need some really on-the-ground facilitation, data gathering, and investment. So really exciting to see that in detail. As a reminder, as everyone who wants to talk they can put their questions in the chat, but also once we open the Q&A, which we're about to do, you can just unmute yourself and ask. I've got one question teed up already from someone, but I'm just going to take my moderator's prerogative, actually, just ask one quick question to you, Jason, because I'm really fascinated. When you talk about shifting the procurement spend, you've 100 million so far out of the 400 million. Where are the other? Do you have an idea of where the other 300 million currently is being spent? Is it on other Australian suppliers? Is it Chinese suppliers? Do you have a broad idea in terms of the geography of those suppliers, and maybe just the broad level kinds of products they are?
Yeah, great question. So my memory says that about 50% of the services were being sourced from our colleagues in our jurisdiction next door, Western Australia. Everyone seems to be very familiar with Western Australia. They've obviously got a very well-developed mining and gas industry. So it's essentially a hub of services, and all the headquarters are essentially located in Perth, capital city for Western Australia. So it wasn't surprising to hear that in the first instance. And the remaining of the 25% was largely, as far as I recall, from original equipment manufacturers, which obviously there's a lot of specialised equipment in the industry. So we're talking about the likes of Italy and Korea and the likes. So So we certainly recognise that a lot of the supplies and services sourced from overseas is quite difficult for us to compete with in the short and medium term, but certainly some of the services that have been offered by Western Australia, we believe that we are now in a position of critical mass across the operators, and it's certainly going to be one of our key talking points at our procurement workshop is how can we actually have some local businesses to displace some of the FIFOs that come across from Western Australia to service our industry.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. Okay. Well, I'll tee up the first question from Haji Aguilar from the World Bank, and this is a question for you at the OECD. He has, considering the diverse types of regional and community development interventions that mining companies or industries have tried, in your experience, what would be the most effective intervention that would be conducive to local and regional economic diversification? I.e., what are the best community development initiatives to help diversify a region from being dependent on mining? So maybe over to you, Andres and Lizanne.
Yeah, thanks. I'm just gonna jump in here on a question, sort of answering the first part, and then I think Andres also wants to say a little bit with that regard. But I think what's important here is to note that some regions don't even have a clear idea of what sort of their competitive advantage and assets are. So what we've seen, what is really helpful for regions that haven't done this, like, I mean, we've now seen sort of a prime example from the Northern Territory who sort of mapped out a strategy, but a lot of regions don't have that. So for them, it's really important to get a grip on, okay, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, and a tool to do this is sort of what we call developing smart specialization strategies. So understanding really in a place-based approach, what can we do, what kind of knowledge do we have, what kind of opportunities do we have to build on, and is there sort of opportunities for diversification sort of from the industry, or like building on the knowledge of the industry, or do we want to look at other industries and how are there maybe links also between them that can be facilitated? And an important aspect within that is sort of like this aspect of innovation and research that is linked to research institutions. So it's really important to sort of build this environment that brings in new ideas and opportunities that sort of allows for different for diversification and for new business opportunities. And I think Andres wants to talk a bit on entrepreneurship culture, maybe.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. I think, well, yes, smart specialization is one of the tools that we advocate that is an important mechanism. But also there are some underlying factors that we have noticed in mining regions and in overall regions that are over specialized on one single industry, that are, we call it the enabling factors. Some of these regions, as probably Lisa was saying regarding this case study of Västerbotten, Norrbotten, they have many SMEs or small companies locking into a supplier like a mechanism with a big company. So these are small companies that are normally owned by families or by one single person. They don't have time to spend time on innovation or on training. So there is a challenge here to create quite a critical mass to help these companies associate either with other SMEs or with the big companies, like the famous example of suppliers of the world that BHP is doing in Chile. They are training these suppliers to improve the capacities. I think these are like essential actions that government can take. Other action probably just quickly is the entrepreneurship culture. We have seen that is normally low, the entrepreneurship culture in mining regions. Women, they tend to outmigrate to cities or to other places to pursue their activities. and young people also, it's hard to take them on in the business. So probably most of the questions are how we keep these people in the region and how we make them create new companies that are, of course, associated with the main strategies of the region. So there are some policies around that in OECD countries, special funds for women entrepreneurship, courses in the high school already linked with entrepreneurship ideas, and internships already since 16 years old with big companies. That's more or less is the takeaway.
Great. Thanks so much. Maybe if anyone has a question who wants to verbally ask it, all you have to do is unmute yourself. Maybe I'll give a minute for that before I go back to the chat. I guess not. So I'll go back to the chat then. We have a question from Rezki, which I think is somewhat related, and I think it's probably a good question for both groups of speakers, which is to say, how do we strengthen suppliers, improve local content, but at the same time generate a less mineral dependent economy? What is the way to achieve this, to prevent this paradox? And I think that, even this is a question about mining. I think Jason and Haley, I think you probably have very similar challenges ahead of you in terms of how to ensure that you don't end up with a totally dependent industry. So love to hear from both groups on this question.
I don't know if Jason wants to start.
So look, we, as mentioned, DTVI has a mandate for the Northern Territory in terms of leading the economic development of our jurisdiction. So I guess when we're talking in this context, we're always looking across the whole gamut of, well, what is our competitive advantages? What are our resources and opportunities that relate to that, and how can we bring those to fruition? Mining and oil and gas certainly bring on significant opportunities and do bring on that boom and bust economic cycle that we have endured to date. But we certainly have significant industries such as tourism and defence and others that also underpin our economy. So while we're very mindful of projects kicking off and it ensures that there is economic activity in the region, we're also trying to ensure that anything we're doing to support development or support skill sets development is also positioning our Territorians to enable them to step into other industries and derive benefits from that primary production. So, Ellie.
I really liked the smart specialisation idea, because I think we're sort of organically doing that. And one of the key areas that I think we're probably leading some interesting initiatives on is the point in which two industry sectors kind of bump into each other and share common needs or opportunities that can, when aggregated, create a whole new opportunity. So Jason mentioned in his presentation some work we're doing around putting in some strategic infrastructure here in Darwin Harbour for a ship lift. At the moment, in Northern Australia, if you want to take out a decent sized boat, including the boats that service offshore oil and gas fields, it's a 10-day steam to Cairns or to Perth each way. So doing that work to understand, okay, the oil and gas industry has a need to service these vessels. We have a defence industry that's got a need to service these vessels. We've got a fishing industry that's got a need to service these vessels. And we've also got near neighbours where we have potentially sophisticated workforces that can help with their vessels as well. So we've done a lot of work to understand the synergies between sectors and those fringes where they cross over, and are now looking to build a whole new marine industry, marine service industry, because of the way that it nestles between these other things where we have advantage. Another key thing, of course, is leverage off the resources you have to move into other areas, and a really important complementary part of our strategy is a population strategy. So Jason talked about how sparsely populated we are. We are working hard to, and I noted in his presentation he invited you all here. If you want to move here, you're welcome to. But certainly to build that critical mass of domestic demand as well.
Great. I don't know, Andres and Lausanne, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to complement that, probably it's important that we need to, I mean, local content and when we undertake these policies to promote mining and the surrounding mining value chain, the related services are attached to these activities. So I think that a good case, the case of Finland, is a good case of that, of how you can build on your capacities, on your current mining value chain, but develop other activities that are related, that need same skills. And we see services at Kiwa now with technology booming and with digitalization and probably, hopefully, in a future, a culture of teleworking that is embedded in all companies. Services can eventually develop everywhere, regardless the density pattern of the need of agglomeration economies. So if that happens, well, there is a chance for mining regions to take advantage of these services related to mining activities.
Great. Okay, I've got a couple more questions. And they're actually both to Jason, and maybe I'll ask them at the same time. One is, can you detail the Northern Territory mining industrial sector before the gas boom? And did that original 25% spend capture, was that a natural, because of the capabilities that were already there, or was that sort of a natural kind of, that just come about because it made sense economically? And the second question is, you mentioned that Western Australia, you share many of the commodities, and there's, essentially a competing supply base. Did you ever coordinate with the West Australia government, or was it more of a case of emulation through competition and essentially driving each other on, or did you ever have any actual kind of regional cooperation on that?
Okay, thank you for the questions. So I'm just making sure I'm covering off on them. So in terms of the first question around, did the capturing the 25% of spend occur naturally? I'm going to suggest, without knowing the full history, that it largely was, but Hayley was around, so Hayley?
The projects that are now up and operational were all subject to local content plans, and I think it did do a couple of things. The first thing is it required them to at least have a look and see what kind of capability and capacity we had here in the Territory, and we did that together. So we have in Australia an industry capability network. As government, we fund them. And businesses actually register their capabilities there, and we require major projects to go and understand from that industry capability network what we can do here, and provide evidence if necessary that they've had a go to give opportunity. It doesn't have to be at any cost, but they certainly need to provide an opportunity to local businesses to be able to participate. When they were doing that, we did a lot of work with local businesses to build their ability, we ran a whole program called Gearing Up Local Business, which was about making sure they had the systems, processes, occupational health and safety, tendering capability, all of that sort of baseline expectations of sophisticated industry. We worked very hard as a government with our local businesses here to make sure they met that baseline so they could actually then come in and compete. So I think we did a pretty good job of that, and that's really one of the reasons that there's still, through that process, a number of businesses created really strong relationships entering the supply chain, not as primes, but subbing into primes and developing strong relationships. And a lot of them are now effectively exporting their services into other states, and certainly there's some cases of into other countries and other continents. Hope that answers that bit.
Yeah, and then
Great. No, that was fantastic. We're just almost at time. There's one question though I'd love to get to really quickly, which is, Samina Dola asked, what key findings from these studies do you think are the most relevant for mining regions and cities in developing economies? So obviously you've been working mostly obviously in Australia, but in the OECD Cities program. But what would you say, some lessons are for developing countries from this?
Well, maybe one thing that didn't come out overly pronounced in my presentation is that while we do operate within Australia, we do have some characteristics in some of our subgroups, particularly in the remote regions, that have certain statistics that are comparable to developing regions in the world. So while I'm certainly still learning lessons in that respect, the one thing I would say that I think is relevant for developing economies and relevant for any jurisdiction, and when you're trying to push this agenda within a community, is it engaging with that community and bringing them on the journey and educating them about what industry is about, what the opportunities are, demystifying some of or myth busting. So for example, we are in the process with that onshore growth prospect of the Beetaloo Subbasin, is where in the early, we're currently translating some gas industry information into language for a number of our Aboriginal community groups. And that's quite complex in its own right, because our Aboriginal Territorians don't have a common language across the whole jurisdiction. There's numerous languages. So I think it's just, the lesson I would take from this is just making sure that you bring the stakeholders and the community on the journey and truly understand, or truly confirming that they understand what you are saying, because there can be a tendency to nod and demonstrate that they understand, but they truly don't, which can hold up progress, can hold up the building of the trust that's necessary for projects to progress in a sustainable way that benefits all parties concerned.
For one more comment, sorry. In addition to that, I think an observation for me is, effectively these regions are hosts to companies to extract whatever resources they're looking for. But I think it's much stronger if you can position yourself as a partner. So the work that we've done, particularly since our projects have got up and built more heavily into a partnership relationship, has enabled us to be able to get ahead of opportunities, and that's making a difference.
Great. Maybe 30 seconds to you, Roseanne and Andres, on this, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, listen.
No, I think it was just important to keep in mind that there might be more sort of power imbalances and inequalities in sort of the developing context. So I think what's really important there is to sort of lift up the capacities of the local government, as well as sort of within the local community and within sort of the small business owners, and pay a lot of attention to that, because otherwise there's no eye-to-eye level cooperation in that sense. So that's I think is one thing that I would just wanted to mention. I think is quite important in that sense.
Yeah, for myself. Okay, I can quickly. Probably is a topic of land use that it's not just important for developed countries, but developing countries have a lot of things to improve on that term, and that comes from regulation and from at the national and local level in work with communities. That is a point, and the other point is now we are advocating a lot for digitalization, broadband as a basic need. So now with automation of mines, but also other opportunities coming from digitalization, I think that is a key area to improve in all rural regions. Yeah.
Great. Okay, well, thank you so much. We're going to continue the discussion online for members of the community of practice. We are going to put a summary of this as well as the recording, and so people can follow up with additional questions, and we'll make sure to get to the speakers. Really appreciate everybody joining today. I think it was really exciting to get into more detail of the mechanics of this, and that was really exciting. So thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you online on the community practice, and thanks very much to our speakers. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.